Welcome to this video where we're going to use Fusion to create a lampshade that can be 3D printed. I'm Steve Cox, an Autodesk certified instructor, and today we're going to go through building this lampshade model in a way that is robust and resilient to being modified in multiple ways. You can then use that initial design created in this video in a way that enables design exploration and allows you to use Fusion together with your own creativity to produce your own bespoke 3D printed lampshade. Firstly though, I need to understand the light bulb and ceiling pendant that will be used together with this lampshade. I found this combination at a hardware store, and these are the dimensions that I will need to consider in designing the lampshade. But you can make your design match whatever parts you have available to you. When you start a new design in Fusion and you encounter this intent-driven design panel, you're being asked to choose what kind of design you're about to create. Since the lampshade I'm designing will be a standalone model, I could select the part design option here. However, because I'm going to be doing some exploration with this design, I'm going to use the hybrid design approach, which gives me a more free-flowing and unstructured workflow. If I later choose to insert other components to reference in my lampshade model as part of that design exploration, the hybrid design option will give me more flexibility to be able to do that. So let's start designing our lampshade for 3D printing. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a sketch on one of the vertical planes and draw a center line for the revolved shape that will create the basis for the lampshade. So we'll put in a vertical line like this, which I'm then going to dimension using the sketch dimension tool. I'm going to make that vertical dimension 185 millimeters because that overall height will be good to accommodate the pendant and light bulb fitting combination that I'm going to use with this design. Now, before I go any further, I want to change that line type from a standard line to a center line. To do that, I can pick the line, go across to the sketch palette and pick the center line option. You'll see that the appearance of the line changes to a chained line. A center line will still create an enclosed sketch profile, but it will give us a couple of advantages that you'll see as we progress. I'm now going to continue my sketch by adding a horizontal line at the top of my center line, which will create the top face of my lampshade, and then another horizontal line at the bottom of the center line to create the bottom face of the lampshade. Now, one of the first advantages of creating that center line is that when I add a dimension, if I click on the line and then go out to the outer point of the line at the top, you'll notice that it gives me a diameter dimension rather than a radius. And that's perfect for what I want because I know the diameter of the fitting that needs to go onto the top of the lampshade. So I'm going to make that 80 millimeters. So that's now dimensioned as a diameter rather than a radius. And I'm going to do the same thing down here for the bottom line. I'm going to click on the center line again and the outermost point of the bottom line and make that 110 millimeters because I want to create a lampshade that will be wide enough at the bottom to get my hand inside to fit or change the light bulb. Now I need to define the outer shape of my lampshade, and to do that I'm going to use the Fit Point Spline tool, which you can find in the Create menu just about halfway down. I'm going to create a fit point spline with just 2 points that connect the ends of the top and bottom horizontal lines. Now at the moment this just looks like a straight line, but if I now press Escape and come out of the spline tool, these green tangency handles mean that I can actually adjust the spline and it can become something other than a straight line. Now, I always say that less is more when it comes to splines. The fewer spline points that you've got, the more pure the curve that it creates, and the purest curve will always come from just 2 fit points like this. Though even with just 2 points, you can still see the large amount of adjustment that you have available for the curve. Whilst less is generally more, one of the things that you can always do is to right click on the spline and use this option here called Insert Spline Fit Point, which will allow you to add another fit point onto the spline if necessary. I'm going to leave it like this with just 2 spline points to give me the basic outline for the lampshade. I'm now going to finish the sketch and come back out into the 3D mode. What I want to do next is to revolve this profile to create a 3D body. So I'm going to use the Revolve tool, and what you'll notice here is the moment that I select that tool, it's actually found the profile and detected the center line as the axis of revolution automatically. So that's a second efficiency benefit of defining the central vertical line in our sketch as a centre line rather than a regular line. I'm now going to click on OK, and I now have the basic shape for my lampshade. This is a fully solid body at the moment, so the next thing I want to do is to hollow the shape out. To do that, I'm going to use the shell command from the Modify menu. If I choose this bottom face, it will actually remove that face and then set a uniform thickness to the rest of the body. As I said at the beginning, this is going to be a lampshade that we're going to 3D print. So in order to make that 3D printing really efficient, I want to make this thickness dimension a multiple of the nozzle diameter I'm going to use to make this particular lampshade. Now for me, that is a 0.4mm nozzle, so I'm going to make this shell thickness 1.6mm. So you can see that it's now shelled out the shape to a uniform 1.6mm thick and opened up the face at the bottom to allow access to the bulb. With this basic shape, I now want to think about giving this lampshade an interesting pattern. But it's a pattern that I only want in the centre of the shade. The first step to achieve that is to cut this single body into 3 separate sections. For that, I'm going to use the offset plane command and firstly create a plane that is minus 15mm from the top surface of the lampshade. Once that's created, I'm going to use the split body option from the Modify menu. I'll select my main lampshade body as the body to split, and then choose the plane that I've just created as the splitting tool. What you see is a red disc appear on the screen, and in Fusion, whenever you see red appear on the screen when using a particular command, you know there's a cutting operation going on. So that plane has now been used to cut this body into 2 parts that you can see in the browser. I'm now going to repeat that with another offset plane, this time 20mm up from the bottom face of the lampshade. I'll then use that plane with the split body command to split off the bottom part of the lampshade. You'll see the red disc appear again, and you can see in the browser that I've now got 3 separate bodies. And at this point I can turn off the visibility in the browser of those 2 planes that I created. My main centre section is now called Body 1, and that's where I'm going to create my pattern. And I've got a separate top part of the body called Body 2 and a separate bottom part called Body 3. Before I produce my patterning, I want to create the hole in the top part of the model for the light bulb fitting to be attached. So I'm firstly going to turn off Body 1 and then use the Hole command, which is found midway down the Create menu. Once I select the Hole command, I can choose the top surface of Body 2 that the hole will begin from, and you will see it will create a hole. And you can use this white point that you see to snap to the hole centre as I bring it close to it. That white point represents the very centre of that top face, and that's exactly where I want this hole to be located. Currently this hole is specified as 40mm, but that's the size of the thread for the fitting, and I do want to provide a little bit of clearance to that, so I'm going to change that hole size to 42mm. Now, one last thing in order to make this a very robust model is to change the extent from distance to the to option. And in this case, the hole needs to go fully through to the underside of Body 2. So I'm going to select that face. That will ensure that this hole will always cut through fully to that face, even if I decide later to change the thickness of this lampshade. This is an example of building in relationships between features into a model that brings more robustness into it when you decide to use it for design exploration or later modification. The top piece of the lampshade is now complete, so I'm now ready to do the patterning in the centre section of the lampshade. I'm going to bring Body 1 back into the workspace and turn off Body 2 and Body 3 so I can concentrate on this centre section for the patterning work. I'm going to create a new sketch again on one of the vertical origin planes, and the first thing I need to do in this sketch is to bring in the overall shape of the body. And to do that, I'm going to use the Project option from the Create menu. With the Project tool open, I need to select the Body option before clicking on Body 1. That will then bring in a reference outline of the body that you can see here when I turn off the body in the browser. This reference sketch geometry will allow me to bring in the elements that I want to use to create my pattern. For that, I'm just going to create 2 diagonal lines. In this case, they're going to be diagonal and connected from the top line of the reference sketch to the bottom. At the moment, these 2 lines aren't parallel, so I'm going to use the parallel constraint from the Constraints menu to ensure that's the case. In this case, the first line I pick will stay where it is, and the parallel constraint will move the second line to be parallel to it. Now they're parallel, I'm going to introduce a dimension between the two, which I want to be 15 millimeters. So that's given me a 15 millimeter wide parallel profile strip that I can use for my patterning. I'll turn body 1 back on now and finish my sketch. I'm then going to use the extrude command, pick on that profile and extrude it. And in doing that, I'm going to set the extrude direction to symmetrical. And as I pull on the arrows, you'll see that it will create a cutting operation when I go beyond the outer wall of the body. Now you may be familiar with the join and cut operations when using the extrude command, but in this case we're going to use the third option, which isn't used that often, and that's called intersect. Intersect in this case will create two bodies formed from what is common between the existing body and the profile cutting through it, which is actually easier to demonstrate than it is to explain. One final thing before I finish this is to change the extent type again, from distance, which is currently going way beyond the outside of the model, to all in this case. That will now make sure it will always cut through to the outer surface of the lampshade, no matter what changes I may make to the overall shape when I go through the design exploration phase with this model. So I've now got these two strips, so let's bring the other bodies back in. I'm going to use these two strips and then use the pattern command from the create menu to create my lattice feature. In this case, it's going to be a circular pattern that I want, and I'm going to click on the two strips and then the vertical origin axis as the axis of revolution. I can now adjust the number of revolutions from the default of 3 to create this lattice type of pattern, and in this case I think 10 repeats looks about right. And that's my basic lampshade model completed, with quite a short but robust and resilient timeline. There's one more thing to do though before it's ready for export in a 3D printing format. But before I do that, I want to show you how you can now explore, modify and create many different versions of this lampshade, and perhaps experiment a little yourself before finally deciding on which version you want to print. For instance, I can right click on the very first sketch in the timeline, go to Edit Sketch, and using the spline tangency handles I can adjust the outer profile of the lampshade to make the overall shape different to the one that I started with. When I finish this modified sketch, because of the way that this model has been built, with the correct parameters and interdependencies, it will successfully rebuild a lampshade. You might then want to edit the circular pattern, and perhaps in this case increase the number of pattern elements to suit the new overall shape by editing the pattern command from the timeline. You could also right click and edit the sketch that created the lattice into something else, maybe using a curve line or more complex straight line strip patterns, for instance, which will give you a completely different type of lattice pattern. You could also right click and edit the position of the cut planes that we created to adjust the top and bottom portions to either increase or decrease the latticed area. So you can see that this is a resilient model that we've built, which gives you lots of options for modifying it to create many different types of lampshade. The image on screen now shows some of the different designs of lampshade that have all been generated from this very same model using the things that I've just mentioned. And hopefully this gives you an idea of the range of modifications and different designs of lampshade that you might be able to create. So as I mentioned earlier, there's one final thing to do when you've completed your design exploration phase and you have a design that's ready for 3D printing. We need to bring all of the multiple bodies that we currently have in this design into a single body that I can export in a format for 3D printing. To do that, under the Modify menu, I'm going to use the Combine command. I'll choose the first model in the browser as the target body, and then for the tool bodies I'll select the second body down in the list, hold down Shift on the keyboard and then pick the final body to select all of the bodies in between. I can then select OK and see all those bodies be combined into a single body in the browser. Now, depending on the complexity of your model and the power of the device that you're using Fusion on, this may take a few seconds to complete. Once you've got a single body, you can also change the appearance and further experiment with how your design might look in the colours that you've got available for 3D printing. Finally, right-clicking on that single body in the browser gives you the option to save as mesh, and then either choose to export it out in the file format of your choice for 3D printing, or choose the option to send it straight to your 3D printing software. The time-lapse video on the screen now shows one of these designs being 3D printed, and is a great example of the design to make workflow. So go ahead and see what kind of lampshade that you can create, and then go on and 3D print it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Add a comment below to share your thoughts, ask us a question, or just to let us know how you get on with designing and 3D printing your own lampshade. If you found the video helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Fusion content. And I'll see you in the next video.